Hello and welcome to Mom's Way to Wellness. I am your host, Aida Maravillas, and today is episode 2 of the self-care series. We are talking about the mindset shifts that make self-care possible. A question that I want to ask you about your mindset surrounding self-care is this. What if the biggest barrier to self-care isn't your schedule, but the beliefs you carry about what you deserve? In today's episode, I'm going to cover how our mindset impacts our approach to self-care and how our idea of self-care can sometimes look bigger than the actual way self-care can be practiced in everyday life. First, let's talk about how our mindset shapes our beliefs about how we see things and even about how we do things. I want to share a story about when I was a young mom. Now, this is a long time ago because my oldest two daughters are already going on 29 and already 30. And I remember being a young mom and struggling to juggle all of the needs my baby had. She just presented in such a unique way as all of our kids do to us individually as moms. And I was very responsive to every cry, sound, and move that she made. I was so tuned into her needs that the first time she slept through the night, I kept myself awake and exhausted for most of it. My mind was set on her pattern, and I believed she would get up to eat, and I had her bottle prepared and ready to go for a feeding. That did not happen on that particular night. I had no idea until years later that my mindset had become fixed. It was fixed on what I expected. I needed sleep. That's really what I needed. It would have been so good to get a good night of sleep that particular night. I remember how exhausted I was, but I convinced myself that by waking up every little while in anticipation of her feeding, somehow I was helping myself and making the situation better by being prepared. Honestly, to me, that sounds a little bit like anxiety, worrying, and being nervous about something that hasn't happened yet. But that's the mindset that I had. I wanted to be prepared, and I was just expecting what I was expecting. What I actually learned that night was that I needed sleep, and the patterns of a baby are not always predictable. I needed to become more flexible and change my mindset on this idea that I could somehow implement a schedule on a baby with no concept of time. My mindset had a lot to do with my preparation that night, and it actually has a lot to do with everyday life. And honestly, it had a lot to do with inherited cultural beliefs and old wives' tales that I received about what it was supposed to be like to start a baby on a schedule from the time of a newborn, which is a lot of pressure. And I want to talk about mindset because there's growth mindset and there's fixed mindset. Mindset can promote growth or it can create limitations. It has the power to move in whatever direction we choose to focus on and work towards. When I worked in education, it was always interesting to learn from the student who had a mindset of growth because they were willing to ask questions, willing to consider information, and willing to learn from their mistakes. Challenges became opportunities for growth for them. But I also worked with students who demonstrated a fixed mindset toward opportunities. They thought if they didn't already know what they were being taught, something must be wrong. They had a whole different response to challenging situations and needed some help to try to consider other perspectives. The thing about mindset is that it really holds a lot of power and a lot of potential. And when it comes to moms and self-care, I've recognized some mindset patterns that moms carry. And this brings us to the first point in today's episode, how our mindset impacts our approach to self-care. Some of the ways I've observed this during conversations have been in some of the statements I'm about to share with you. And as I go through these statements about self-care, I want to challenge you to listen to see if you can relate to any of them. Here I go. I don't deserve rest. Everyone else's needs come first. I should be able to handle everything. Rest is something I have to earn. If I slow down or don't do it, everything will fall apart. I'm curious. Have you thought or believed any of these things about yourself? Maybe in a thought or in an action, even if it wasn't said out loud, or maybe in a conversation with another mom about how hard things feel sometimes. These statements reflect a fixed mindset around self-care. They are beliefs rooted in limitation, in pressure and stress, instead of flexibility, understanding, and self-compassion. They represent beliefs that stand on limits and don't necessarily see opportunities for some level of change or perspective that there can be another way. But a growth mindset is open to reframing these beliefs, and I want to walk you through a few ways to reframe these particular sayings. What if instead of saying to yourself, I don't deserve rest, you were able to reframe it to say, rest is a way to prepare myself for the next thing? Or instead of everyone else's needs come first, you considered reframing your mindset to say, I have needs too, and that's okay. What if instead of I should be able to handle it, you considered reframing the thought to say, I think I've reached my limit for today. Personally, I may reach my limit pretty often now that I'm a lot more self-aware of my needs. But all jokes aside, we'll get back to the reframes. And what if instead of saying rest is something I need to earn, you considered reframing it to say rest is something my body is designed for? What if instead of saying if I slow down or don't do it, everything will fall apart, you considered reframing it to say I need help or I can't do it all. What can I let go of? These are some examples to consider what your mindset may be when it comes to self-care and how to reframe thoughts that limit the opportunity to consider self-care as something important to do. Because it is something important to do. I believe that so passionately and so strongly, and that's why this message is so important for me to share with you as a busy mom, from one busy mom to another. And I know we hold a lot, and I know we juggle a lot, and I know that we want to do the best that we can do with the resources that we have. And self-care is just an opportunity to increase the tools in your toolbox and increase the amount of resources that you have. And now that we've touched on how mindset impacts self-care for moms, I want to shift to the second point about how our idea of self-care can sometimes look bigger than the actual way it can be practiced in everyday life, especially for busy moms. I think this is where a lot of moms get stuck when it comes to self-care. First, we find ourselves believing that it's something we can't prioritize because of our responsibilities, our view of self-worth, or what we believe we deserve. Then we picture it as something big, something expensive, time-consuming, or out of reach for our current season of parenting. And this is the second way that mindset can impact our approach to self-care, by imagining it as something out of reach when it can be small, simple, and sustainable. Because self-care can't always look like a retreat or a girls' trip or a vacation from our responsibilities. It is important to start to think about it as something practical instead of something that is purely pampering. In the next episode of this series, we will get into more detail about what small, sustainable, and simple self-care can actually look like. But for today, I am asking you to become aware of your beliefs about self-care, your needs, your limitations about caring about your needs. Your needs. the limitations you are carrying about your needs, the pressure you can place on yourself, the beliefs that may be keeping you stuck in patterns of exhaustion, and becoming open to the idea that taking care of yourself is part of caring for you, and it's also part of caring for your family. Notice the thoughts that surface when you really need some aspect of self-care. When you notice a moment of overwhelm or the pressure building inside of you and you wish you could take that break, go for that walk. That is my go-to. Go for that walk. Or make it through a podcast episode without having to hit pause for the 5th time. Take a pause and notice the guilt, notice the pressure, and before judging yourself, take a deep breath, and I will do it with you now. We can take a deep breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. And feel your body release some of the tension that it's holding. And be gentle in your thoughts toward yourself and ask yourself, is there another way to think about this? Because your approach to self-care may not begin with changing your schedule or addressing the external stressors or changing what responsibilities you're carrying or what your co-parent is carrying or what your partner is helping with. It may begin with changing what you believe you are allowed to need, acknowledging what your body was designed to need, and what you believe it can look like in the season of motherhood you are currently in. We started this episode with a question. What if the biggest barrier to self-care isn't your schedule, but the beliefs you carry about what you deserve? And we tackled that by addressing how mindset impacts our approach to self-care and how our idea of self-care can sometimes look bigger than the actual way self-care can be practiced in everyday life. As we wrap up today's episode, I want to leave you with 3 practical takeaway questions to reflect on. First, what do I believe about self-care? Second, what did I learn about my self-worth growing up? And third, do I only value myself when I'm productive? As you take some time to reflect on these questions throughout the week ahead, I encourage you to be gentle in your response to yourself. If you need to go rewind to taking the breath with me, go ahead and take it again. And every time that you notice that it's hard to answer or it's challenging to really, really dig deep into yourself and be honest about these things, it's okay because there's no judgment about the challenges that you might be holding when it comes to being able to care for yourself. If you're watching on YouTube, you can comment on what your biggest obstacle is when it comes to self-care. If you are listening on your favorite streaming platform and want to engage in the conversation, sign up for my newsletter where we dive a little deeper into the personal ways that these topics are playing out in everyday life. Thank you for joining me on Mom's Way to Wellness. I hope you find some ways to care for yourself in the week ahead because you matter too, even in the middle of caring for everyone else. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you thought of someone who can use the encouragement that you received from this episode, please share it with them. If you would like to receive the monthly newsletter and insider information about the show, you can sign up to be part of the Mom's Way to Wellness community at aidamaravillas.com.